Hatch Coaching, based out of Fargo, North Dakota. Hatch Coaching is a spinoff of Hatch Realty, which we started about 4 years ago, which is pretty exciting now. I want to tell you a little bit of a journey that we've had. I got into real estate full-time in 2011. 2012, started a team. 2013, got kicked out, messed up every way you could, and then started back over. And when we started back over, we kept leadership at the core. And so everything kind of changed when we made leadership a really serious thing. Fast forward to now, in 2016, we were recognized as the number 40 real estate team in the country. Hatch Coaching is becoming a bigger movement for us, and we are finding great joy in connecting with people all across the country in North America, trying to impact their lives in the best possible way that we can. And our hope and our desire is to give as much value as we possibly can. Hatch Realty, which we get the privilege of coaching and leading as well. Robbie and I both are spawns of that. Now with Hatch Coaching, it's a very clever name. But as we take a look back, Hatch Realty last year, we sold 594 transactions, almost $130 million in volume. We're pacing far ahead of that this year. And so we're expecting our numbers to continue to rise. Numbers matter, sure. There are things to be excited about, but what I really get excited about are things like retention and getting the best out of people. And so today's webinar has everything to do with leadership and everything to do with rising the tide for people in your organization. And it won't have anything to do with real estate. So I know we have a lot of people who maybe are checking this out that don't fit one of those categories of realtor or salesperson, and that's okay because it's going to rise the tide here. That's my story. Robbie, tell our wonderful friends here a little bit about your story before we get too deep.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I got into the real estate world with Eric, I actually worked on political campaigns, which was the perfect setup for this because it kind of goes like this. There's campaigns, insurance salesmen, and then real estate. Kind of all bundled together of the least desired jobs. But what I learned through my political experience was when you ask people great questions, people love to talk and have a conversation with you, no matter where they're coming from. So that's kind of my story. Studied politics, and then now started as an ISA on Eric's team, 4 years ago. We're fourth graders in this, just figuring it out. And took those same lessons into the ISA world. Instead of using scripts and talking at people, my whole goal was to ask really great questions. That way I can engage with people. And then through that, really studied Eric's leadership and have been helping lead the team since. So.
Oh, so good to have you. And Robbie, you are one of the most fantastic coaches and people in the entire country. So it's great to partner with you. Folks, if you have questions and you're watching this webinar live, go ahead and in that chat bar, ask us questions and we'll try to answer those as we go. If you don't have any questions or if you're not watching live, just feel free to sit back and see the light reflect off my giant forehead. It'll be a great start. So today is all about leadership, and instead of 5 tips, we want to give you 6 tips for leadership. And the very first thing we want to talk about is being a servant. Tip number 1, the most important takeaway of all the takeaways is servant leadership. It looks different than regular leadership, and it looks different than management. I think that the world belongs to those who serve. It's even a bit cross-cultural, but what you find is that in your little world, when you have the opportunity to give back and invest in people and spend your time pouring into them, I think that's what servant leadership is. Servant leadership is others before self. It's giving before taking. It is providing, and then hopefully it bears fruit. So here are 4 things that you need to make sure you place in order, okay? Number 1, if you're going to be a servant leadership, you got to serve your God and family first. This is not a faith talk. It's simply just saying that whatever it is, God and family should come first. That means that needs to be reflective on your time, on your schedule, and in your habits. If you go home and you get dinner with your family and you're checking your phone a few times and then you're sitting on the couch hanging out with your kids and your spouse and you continue to look at that phone, which is just a major painful addiction that most of us have, what you're saying to your family is that you don't matter. Those certainly, I don't think any of us have that intention, but
Right.
if right now I was checking my phone while going through this, you would say this is a disingenuous experience, and there's something here that says that I'm not important enough.
Right.
And so being a servant means you have to make people feel important, and you have to make them feel loved, and that's reflective in your habits. And so the people that you need to serve first and foremost are God and family. Number two, and this is where I think most people, including myself, have gotten this wrong in the past, is that if you have a team of any kind, and if you have clients of any kind, heck, if you work at a church, your congregation are your clients. If you sell anything, whomever's on the other end of the phone is your client. But the person that needs to come second, or the group that needs to come second, is your team. They have to be in that order. After God and family, they need to be next. And this is where, again, most people get it wrong, is that they're going to set up their entire structure to try to care for the clients. I was talking with a local realtor buddy of mine, and he said that my 2017 goal, above and beyond anything else, is to put my clients first. And I heard him say that, and I said, oh, man. And I love him and care for him, and so I just gave him my insight. And I'm not saying that what I'm preaching is absolute truth, but I've learned from experience that when you put your clients first, that means you're kind of serving yourself before you're serving your team. Where you're going to get is where you've gotten, is on most people riding your back. Robbie, you got to a certain point in our business by riding my back. The business, the success that I had, right?
Yeah, still riding those a little bit.
But now, here's the great thing, is now I ride your back. I'm going to get to the next level in my life and my world because we've built into you and we've invested in you. And that's going to take us to that next point, right?
Right.
Now, folks, if you're hearing this, this doesn't happen overnight. The investment of your team is a long-term investment. It is a harvest that takes longer than a week, a month, or even a year. And it is a long, drawn-out process. We'll unpack that more as we go through this today. But number one, we serve our God and we serve our family. Number two, we serve our team. Number three, we serve our clients in that order. If you put your clients first and your team second, those two, you're going to mess it up. And you're going to mess it up because the people who should be taking care of your clients should be your team. And if you haven't gotten out of the way yet because of that, you are continuing to have people ride on your back and you not on theirs. And so with everything you can do, please invest in your team first and your clients second when we're talking after God and family.
And I think on that, can I get into that real quick for a second?
Oh, you better, yeah.
So I think really what that gives us framework of it is kind of like trickle down service, in my opinion. Our team is at our absolute best when Eric is serving our team well, because when our team is doing well, then we have servant leaders going out and creating more leaders and providing great service. And one thing really stood out to me, Eric, you had said that the goal should be to make people feel important. And I want to talk about that for a moment because I think far too many people think that you can just give somebody time and make somebody feel important, or give people money, when in reality it has to be quality time. We all know the story, right? We go home and we sit down and we watch Netflix, and you sit next to your spouse or your family or your team, and it's just distracted time. When in reality, the power comes from being ultra present with somebody. When Eric and I sit down, when we have our best conversations, it's not when we're watching a basketball game or a football game or baseball. Granted, we do that once in a while. It's when we sit down and we give each other our undivided attention, and we ask each other questions to find out more about what we're feeling, what's going on in our lives. That's how you make somebody feel important. It has to be quality time, just not just time.
Great point, Robbie. And that time can't be just about production. The investment in your people and the folks that you get to lead have to be completely revolved around love. It's not about the number of deals that they close or the dollars that they can bring in. I think you have to know them at the core, and that creative, that compassionate connection has to be relevant. It starts with your family, then your team, then your clients, And the fourth way that you need to serve is your community. I think it is imperatively important that your community gets the best of you. That means your time, that means your talents, and that means the resources that you have. Man, we live in a karmatic type of society, or in a cause and effect type of society. And what you throw out there is the boomerang that usually comes on back. And so if you're doing this right, and if you take servant leadership to the core, I really think you're going to be in a great place. So number one, the best possible leadership advice we can give you is to be a servant leader and to serve those people in your world. Robbie, did we cover that pretty okay?
I think we nailed it. That was good.
Oh, way to pat ourselves on the back here. We're off to a great start. The number 2 tip for being a great leader and growing your capacity is to understand the ability to mirror and match. This is common language for us in our real estate world, but I don't know if it necessarily shows up in other places, or at least it has different terminology. So let me explain mirroring and matching for you. I'm even having a hard time saying it. Mirroring and matching looks like this. If Robbie shows up and he is full of energy and bouncing off the walls and excited about life, the best way that I can connect with Robbie authentically is to do the same. If Robbie is pumped up about something, I need to mirror and match that. So I need to see what he's doing, and then I match that just the same. Now, we need to understand people's personality profiles as well as what's happening in their life in order to mirror and match well. So the first thing I want to cover are personality profiles, okay? One thing that's common in our world is the DISC profile, D-I-S-C. You can have Myers-Briggs, you can have StrengthsFinder. All these things are great for you to know and understand a basic knowledge of. For us, I want to think of the DISC like this. Imagine we're getting on an elevator, okay? There's 4 types of people. First is the D. D is dominant. D is demanding. They're usually ones that are jumping into power positions. Notice I didn't say leadership positions, but I said power positions.
Yes.
And so if they're getting on an elevator, even though the button's already pushed, they're going to go and they're going to push that button anyways. They do their thing and they just drive. On a scale of 1 to 100, I'm a 99D. I love being in charge. I love power positions. I love the sound of my own voice. It's awkward. Robbie, where are you on the scale of 1 to 100 up for a D?
Yeah, I'm pretty high up there too, darn near 99. So pretty dominant and direct. I'm not afraid to tell you what I think, to say the least.
Right. And so we know how to communicate with each other if we're mirroring and matching, right? We know that we can be direct because that's how you like to be communicated to, is direct.
Very much so.
Next is the I. I is influential or social. These are people who usually need the accolades and the affirmation from other people. I's need to be told they're pretty. I'm a 99 I as well. Robbie, where are you on the DISC profile for the I?
I think naturally I'm a social hermit, like a negative 99.
You have an innie.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
The I's love the limelight. They love being social. They get energy from other people. And so the I's would talk to everybody on the elevator, whether or not a little bit of drink has influenced them one way or the other. Okay, the S's, these people are stable. These are team players. They usually fear change, and they're not boat rockers. And so the S's, and I'm about a 50 S. I'm right in the middle. Robbie, where are you?
I'm pretty high, actually, around the 65, 70 mark, so pretty high.
Okay. Well, the S's would look and see that everybody's getting on this elevator, and they're going to say, I'll wait until the next elevator car comes around. I don't need to disrupt these people, right? These are not boat rockers by any way, shape, or form, and they usually fear change.
Right.
Finally, on the DISC profile, the C, these people are cautious. They're analytical. They're good with numbers. They love to analyze. You can fake it till you make it, but I'm an 11 on the DISC profile for my C. Details aren't my thing. Robbie, how about you? Where are you at?
I'm pretty high. I about a 65, 70. I like details.
Yeah, thank goodness, because that's why we're a good balance for each other. I'll talk to people and you'll do the details behind the scene, right?
Yeah, I'll be taking those notes while you're talking. So
right. So if we understand the importance of mirroring and matching, and that is connecting with somebody where they're at. If I'm talking to somebody who is not a boat rocker and who doesn't love things that are demanding and that isn't super social, if I'm talking to an S and I'm a high D and a high I, how do you think they'd handle it if I came across and I was really aggressive and I talked really fast and I said this, 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 and this, and was demanding, right? We're going to get people that shrink, and we're going to get people that show up with maybe a little more of a wall being put up.
And it's because they're uncomfortable. It's really what it comes down to is you are the antithesis of them, right? And no matter who you're talking to, the person they like most is themselves. Because that's how we're built is, Eric, you like yourself most because you are Eric Hatch. That's who you are. You've intentionally created who you are, or sometimes unintentionally, but you are who you are. And when you are reminding them somebody that's not them, you're making them really, really uncomfortable.
Yeah, spot on. And to understand somebody's profile, and this is where leadership really shows up. And I have to lean in on this because this is where leadership really shows up. Is that if you're showing up as somebody that says, I'm a high D, everybody else needs to respond in my manner, or they need to change to fit me. That's not mirroring and matching, and I don't think that that's leadership. That's management. Management says, here's where we need to be, and everybody else has to get there, right? We talk about standards in terms of production, but a lot of managers show up that think that they're leaders, and they say, I'm this way, everybody else needs to fit. But leadership is slow, and management is fast. And if you're going to lead people, I have to say that it's your job to know how they are and who they are, and you best mirror and match that. Now, remember I said there's two things. One is to understand somebody's natural personality and how they show up. And the other is to understand what's going on in their life. And when you understand what's going on in their life, whether it's a high point or a low point or anything in between, you show up differently, right? If you've had something terrible happen in your life, did you notice how my voice softened and I slowed down even a little bit? And you maintain eye contact for longer and you talk with more sincerity. That's far more important than you just telling me about your dog walk last night. And understanding what's happening in people's lives. Or if there's something really exciting, you get permission to bring that with them and to celebrate that with them. Leadership shows up in mirroring and matching. Leadership does not show up in management. It can show up in management, but leadership and mirroring and matching is the perfect blend. Robbie, what is the golden rule? Because we hear the golden rule all the time.
Yeah, the golden rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. Treat others the way we want to be treated. Sorry, mix them up.
Yeah, Robbie's been drinking all morning, everybody. It's really troublesome. Yeah, hard pass on that. So the golden rule says treat others the way I want to be treated. Like I want to be treated like a D and an I on the disc profile. I want you to come at me and be direct and tell me I'm pretty. Like that's what I want. Is I want to be super social. I want to laugh. Then I want to get down to business, right? But the platinum rule says this: treat others the way in which they want to be treated. And when I'm talking to Robbie, I know I have to give details. Because remember, his C is higher. And so I have to slow down and deliver more details and be more prepared. Or if I'm talking to somebody who's a high S, and by the way, most of the world are high S's, I need to move slower. I need to cast vision before we ever even get there and allow them time to let it simmer and come up with their own conclusions. I can't demand decisions to be made on the spot because most people can't do that. And yet I love decisions quickly and I can make them quickly. But if I mirror and match properly, I got to move slow. Robbie, how do we do there?
I think we're good. And I want to hit on one piece because you're 100% correct that mirroring and matching means treating people the way they want to be treated. But there's a huge piece you talked about briefly that we need to go a little deeper into. And it was when you were talking about knowing what's going on in their life. And this is the piece that I think can't be faked. is you actually have to care. And that's something that's way overlooked is people oftentimes think I can just ask a question and write it down and that's good enough. When in reality, actually caring is having empathy to understand and try to feel what other people are feeling. Because if you just know what's going on, Eric, that's one piece. But if you can feel what's going on in my life, you're going to know so much better on how to communicate with me and how to help me. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is you can't just ask it. You got to ask from a place of empathy. And that's the way you can truly connect with somebody to get that piece. That way you actually know what's going on in my life and vice versa.
Great point, Robbie. And one of the questions that was asked was, how do you lead people that are older than you? And that's actually a really, really great question. If you're a 20 or 30 or 40 something and you're leading people who are 30, 40 and 50 and 60 somethings, like how does that work? And the best example I can use is one of my closest friends here in Fargo. His name's Eric. Yeah, very great name. We have like one name in Fargo and it's Eric. He went to work for his family's company. And so he's all of a sudden the boss's kid and went to work for a company that's a construction company with like 300 people. Now, Eric is educated and polished and a bit metrosexual. And you take that and you combine that with people who have worked in the construction industry for 20 or 30 years. And he was scared to death of that transition. And I asked him how it was going. Like, these are people that he is going to be leading or is leading. And I said, what are you doing to build that relationship? And he said, the last thing I do is to go in and try to manage these people. Mm-hmm. Instead, I go in and I ask them about their kids, and I ask them about fishing, and I ask them about hunting, and I ask them about their weekend, and I take an interest in their life, and hopefully they'll eventually take an interest in mine. Mm-hmm. But did you see that? Because that's where leadership really shows up, is it shows up when you take the first step of interest and you invest in that person and you show that empathy so you know where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. He's about 10 years younger than me and yet 20 years wiser than most. So to my friend Eric, thank you for setting a great example. So we've covered two things so far for leadership: be a servant leader, and number two is mirror and match really well. By the way, folks, if you're listening, again, go to the chat bar, ask us some questions, and we are happy to try to answer some questions in time. Number three, and this is a really big one, is to create leaders and not followers. There's a lot to unpack there. I'll use this as the best example. When I started my real estate team back in 2012, I had, by the end of the year, I had a team of 13 that was working with me. And again, they were riding on my coattails because I spent every day committed more to my clients than I was to my team. And so I assigned them duties, and I said, do this, do this, do this. And I thought I was creating this really great world. The brokerage I was working with gave me the opportunity to start over, and I was shown the door. And from there, the 13 people that were on my team, only 2 people came with me. I didn't invite a few along, but for the most part, everybody else said, I'm not coming with you. And I realized that I had created a world of people following me. And when they saw that I got kicked out because I had created a mess that was too big for me to create, or too big for me to get out of, they said that this person isn't going to get me to where I want to go. They ultimately said, I can't follow you anymore, and I was never a leader in your world. They didn't say it directly, but that's exactly the implication that I got. And so when given the chance to start over, I realized that I could no longer have people come and simply be delegated tasks by me. There's a huge difference between delegation and empowerment. Delegation means I'm giving you something. Empowerment means I'm giving you permission to build something, a world to run. Robbie, you started with us 3.5 years ago. What was your first task that you had to do?
Putting together an abundance of IKEA furniture. Like an abundance. We're talking ton, a whole office worth. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Robbie, did I jump in and show you how to put together that furniture?
No, probably because he didn't know how.
Yeah, good point. But you spent your first month putting together IKEA furniture because we were moving offices and we were it needed to be done, and so you just showed up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you moved into the ISA role, and we had another ISA there named Josh.
Yeah.
You and Josh essentially, did I delegate to you tasks to do, and did I show you how to do it, or did I give you a world in which you were allowed to build and create and own it yourself?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. You said, this is the goals. These are the things I would love to see you do, and this is what you can create. You should go and do it. And you threw me out there.
We cast the vision together saying, these are the number of transactions we want. This is the impact we want. This is the success we want. But ultimately, I wasn't driving the car.
No, you were there. And this is the other piece of that is when I had questions and when I wanted advice, you didn't just answer, you pointed me in the right directions. But you never gave me the exact blueprint. You allowed me to create the blueprint.
So if we determine that our destination is San Antonio, Texas, that's where we want to go, we know we got to head south. And in most people's worlds, my guess is if you're struggling with this issue of having too many followers and not enough leaders, my guess is that you're driving the car. And instead, I was the passenger, but I wasn't a backseat driver. Being a backseat driver could be translated into being a micromanager, right? And telling you what to do and when to do it. And my goodness, you are going to piss some people off if you do that.
Yep.
And instead, I was along for the ride, and I was essentially deciding what we were going to do once we got to San Antonio. I was planning our agenda in San Antonio. And Robbie would occasionally say, hey, am I still heading in the right road? And I'd look at the map, and I'd say yeah or no, and we'd readjust. But I let you drive.
Right.
Go
ahead. Go.
Yeah, no, you.
Well, I was going to say this, and the reason this is so crucial to have somebody, to empower somebody in a way like this, I think this is actually one of the biggest pieces to retention. As you were talking, it just clicked. This ISA gig became my thing. It had my fingerprints now on the blueprint. It wasn't just Eric's. And I had intrinsic value time that I wanted to make sure that I stayed a part of it, because this was not just Eric's baby anymore. This wasn't just Eric's company anymore. This wasn't just Eric's idea. This was now our idea. And it's a lot more difficult for somebody to just up and leave when they're involved not in just the implementation, but in the creation of the plan and the framework before the implementation. And that's a big piece of it. Not only that, it was great for us because I had the hunger then to consistently improve, because this was on me now. It wasn't just on you. So I think this is a huge piece to helping people retain people, is empowering others to take on their projects, because then they feel like it's not just your company, your idea, it's our idea. And that's huge.
Robbie, I just got back from an awesome trip to Steamboat, Colorado last week. And I pulled up in Denver after my flights, and I rented the car to drive to Steamboat. And I rented, it doesn't matter what kind of car you rent. You drive a car differently when it's rented than when it's your own, right?
Yeah, fuck, gets a little heavier.
Yeah, it sure does. And when you have a fancy vehicle too, you take full advantage when you rent it. And I think about that in the world of our businesses and our teams, right? Is somebody driving like it's their own car, or are they driving like they rented it?
There it is. Money.
And my wife, if she rented a car, she would drive 10 miles under the speed limit, and she would be the opposite of destructive. And she would take such great care of it that she would be so afraid to risk in going fast. And if I were to rent a car, I'd have my pedal to the metal, and I would drive probably a little more destructively than I would with my own car. So either way, I don't know if we're getting the best drivers when it's a rented car.
That's a good point.
And so in your worlds right now, are the people that need to be leaders, are they driving like it's their car, or are they driving like it's your car? Because if they're driving like it's your car, they're not going to be driving to their best ability. Instead, they need to drive it like it's their car. And I hope you hear that very clearly. Secondly, when you're creating leaders and not followers, man, it's important to shut up. and it can't be your show. One of the things that we've done here at Hatch Realty is we've spent a lot of time over the last 3.5 years developing leaders. And in fact, we have just developed our second tier of leaders now that are essentially being handed the baton to run our entire business. And these leaders are getting the opportunity not because they're the top producers, and not because they've been here the longest, and not because of a position of power, but rather they're getting it because they've shown up with great concern for the business, and they've shown a passion for wanting to impact and to do more. And so what we've done now is we bring them in and we walk through a very simple process. And if you're taking notes, I'd encourage you to write this down because it's elementary and yet it's totally advanced. Number one, they need to watch you to see what you do. And you can't just say, well, they've watched me for a long time. They have to watch with intention. Okay. It's not copying what you do, it's studying how you think. And you have to give them that permission to, number one, watch you to see what you do. Number two is you watch them to see what they do. And this step is skipped far too often, especially in leadership development, is I give you the position, I give you the title, you've watched me maybe from a distance, and then I just assume that you know what the hell you're doing. And instead, with our leadership group here at Hatch Realty, we gather every week for 2 hours, and we talk until we're blue in the face. In those meetings 3.5 years ago, I was the first person talking. And they basically all just sat there and nodded and agreed with me. Yes, Eric, that's a great idea, even though it was mostly terrible ideas. And then that's changed now. And now I act as the secretary in the group. And I bring the agenda that comes from everybody, and then I bring up an issue, and then I shut up. And I let the group come to the conclusion there. Now, I can jump in and grab the steering wheel at any time, but I allow the group to go through and to think how I think and to do what I assume is best. And the great thing when you bring leaders together is that quite often a better solution is found than what I would have ever have come up with. So number one, watch them, or they'll watch you to see what you do. Number two, you watch them to see what they do. And then number three is you're automatically giving this person and this group permission to go and lead without you now. But you've inspected it and you've trained it and then you've monitored it and you've gotten better together. It's really important, guys. If you're wanting to get serious about leadership, you can't just have followers. If you want a great world, you got to be surrounded by people who kick butt. And if they're going to kick butt, you got to spend the time. And it's not days or weeks or months. It's years of development. Now, you can lead in the beginning, but to have people who lead an empire and that you can fully trust, man, that takes time. Robbie, your thoughts?
I think you're spot on. I think you crushed that one.
Oh, feels so good. Okay. Number four. Number one is servants. Number two, mirror and match. Number three, create leaders, not followers. The number four tip on how to become a better leader is to have social capital. This is your ability to essentially have a room one and to have trust happen. Robbie, you called me out. And you can always tell when there's a good leader when they call you out. Robbie called me out a couple of months ago because I went into a room that was filled with our agents, and I basically had this new thing that I wanted them all to buy into. And I, for years in this company, was the guy, the face, and the connection. I was the top producer, and then I was also the only leader. At least I didn't give other people permission. We had other leaders, but I hadn't given them the framework and the permission to run. And so fast forward now a couple of years, and in my head, I still think I'm the dude, right? It's a company that I own, and it's the company that I fund, and it's all those things. It even has my name on it. And so in my head, I thought, well, I can just show up and I can do what's called a plop and drop. You have an idea and you dump it and you walk away and you expect everybody to just take it and run with it and that it's really great. But it's called the plop and drop because it usually stinks. And I walked into that room with the agents whom I love and care about, but I'm not invested in like I used to be. Right. I don't spend the time training and scripting and role playing and really unpacking like I used to. I spend my time investing in my 5 leaders. And those 5 leaders spend their time investing in the agents and the admin who are here. And so when I showed up in that room, I did everything I could to deliver a great message, and I plop and dropped and I walked out. And I had, I was kind of the cock of the walk, like, yeah, Eric, you did it again. You crushed it. You brought something great with value to these people. And then Robbie, you son of a gun, you came into my office and you're like, dude, what was that? Yeah. I'm like, what are you talking about? And you said, yeah, you just went in and you didn't make it to believe that it's their idea, and you didn't earn the right to be heard in that room. Mm-hmm. Earning the right to be heard and having social capital means that you are connected on an intimate level with those people.
Yep.
I showed up as a manager that day, and I showed up with the plop and drop. And leadership shows up by moving slow. Again, leadership is slow. Management is fast. And I managed that situation, and I failed my group that time. And so thank goodness Robbie came to me and he hit me between the eyes with it. So Robbie, your thoughts on how bad I sucked that day?
I think you're 100% right. And I think it created a litmus test in my mind of, if you want to go into a room and win people over, if you truly want to win them over, what you say in that moment probably doesn't matter as much or nearly as much as when was the last time you individually sat down with each of these people and connected with them. Because if you haven't done that, you're some, and even Eric, who's the company's named after, that is the bona fide leader of our company, they weren't connected with him. Therefore, the message was never going to be received in the way that Eric wanted it to be received. Because you talked like you would you and I talking. And if you were talking to me, that would have been okay, because I was a part of one of the 5 that you had invested in. That was a part of that leadership circle. The litmus test is, when was the last time you sat down with these people? And if you can't check that off, the success of the quality of that conversation is not going to be anywhere near as what you want it to be.
It's amazing that speed matters so much in a business, and yet we have to move so arduously slow. Mm-hmm. That we want to get to place, but the speed that we have and the speed that we can go is completely reliant on the relationships that we have, mm-hmm. and the social capital that we have. That actually that'll be a good transition to my 5th point. And my 5th point of how to become a better leader is to be vulnerable and to show up as a leader and own your brokenness. I had a friend actually reach out yesterday to a Facebook group that I'm a part of, and basically said, and I was so appreciative of his honesty. He said, I used to be a leader of a company where I had 120 people that I led. And now I moved into a real estate world, and in this real estate world, it's not going like I wanted, and I'm losing some key people and folks that I've really invested in. And then went on to say, well, the split is this, and here are the issues at play. And the responses have been really interesting. What I've seen people say is, it's a culture piece. It's a culture piece. It's a culture piece. And the ability for a leader to show up and to understand that culture piece is important, because for me, speed is important. And for many of you, speed is important. But if people don't trust you, and if they don't know you, and if you don't trust them, and if you don't know them, speed will not be on your side. Mm-hmm. And so as my friend on this Facebook group confesses, we're all trying to help him get to this same place of healthiness. It came down to this, and everybody said, you have to have a great coach. It's one of the key elements for you to succeed, is you have to have a great coach, because a coach is going to call you out on your crap. And a coach is going to help listen well and then hold you accountable to some things. Now, having a coach is one thing, but it's also the pressing need for you to show up with great transparency and vulnerability. And so here's the advice I gave my friend is, number 1, right now you're really hurting. And I think you actually need to go to your team and show that hurt. If it's with tears or sadness, whatever it may be, you need to go and show this hurt. The next thing you need to do is you need to ask your group who loves and cares about you. You need to ask them essentially, how can you get better as a leader? Where are you lacking? What have you done wrong? What do they want to see out of you? And I can't tell you how difficult that is as a leader, or even as a Joe Blow, to basically say, all right, folks, tell me where I suck. And that's really tough, but leaders should be able to take that kind of feedback. But the final piece that he needs to do, and the reason why I think people will stay in his world or leave his world, is the interpersonal connection that he has. And connection is only made when the conversations are no longer about production, but rather they're about connection. It's switched from how many homes can you sell and how much money can you make me, to rather what do you want in your life and how can I help you get there. That shows up with vulnerability, and that shows up with intimacy. Let me give you the best possible example because it's fresh for me. Last week with Hatch Realty, we had a quarterly training session, and between our companies of Hatch Coaching and Hatch Realty and our marketing company, we had about 40 people present. And I got in front of the group and I basically confessed. I confessed that I had not been a good enough leader for them, and that I hadn't been fully invested in the group. I confessed. I showed that vulnerability, and with tears in my eyes, thank goodness we had one of our team members fall out of their chair because I was about to lose it emotionally. So thank goodness she fell, but I wish she didn't fall. But with tears in my eyes, I told the team, and I confessed that I hadn't done a good enough job of encouraging them to believe that they were as capable as they are. And I hadn't shown up with all my right intentions. Now, I have every excuse in the book, right? I have young kids, and I have these other things that are taking my time, and I have X, Y, and Z, and whatever it is, it's all an excuse. And I said, no excuses. You deserve better, and I'm about to give it to you. And so I'm now intentional and more purposeful with what I'm doing. But I showed a vulnerability, not because I'm trying to buy sob points for my team, but rather I'm trying to show them who my authentic self is. This world is really tough when you try to pretend to be two people. And I just need to show them that I am not the world's most confident person, and that I have major insecurities, and that I don't love what I see when I look in the mirror, and that I'm not always happy with what I do. If you act like your crap doesn't stink, my guess is everybody just smells stinky crap. And so it was my intention to get vulnerable. And then we give times for our group to get vulnerable, and they're in small groups where they can open up. And on my schedule right now, I have a lunch with every single one of our team members, all 40 of them, for me to connect. And those aren't conversations to talk about, hey, how are your numbers and how's your production? Rather, those are conversations to say, how's your life? How's your spouse? How are your kids? How are you? And to give a place and a space to be more vulnerable and more intentional. Vulnerability matters for leadership. I think that people will rally around folks who show up and say, I don't have all this figured out together. If you show up and say that I have all this figured out, it will be like a repellent for people. Leaders will show up. I think some of the best leaders are firefighters because they run towards a fire and not away from it. And if you are vulnerable enough and strong enough to admit that you have some fires going on, you're going to find leadership that shows up. Robbie.
One of my favorite quotes to touch on that point, and I'm not sure if it was Brene Brown, by the way. If you ever want to read about vulnerability or watch a video, check out Brene Brown's YouTube video, TEDx Talk, or read one of her books. But we think that when we're vulnerable that it's going to push people away. When in reality, when we're vulnerable, it actually draws people in.
It's the last thing that we want to show, and yet the first thing that we look for.
Exactly. And this is what happened from somebody that saw this last week at our quarterly was after Eric was vulnerable, people flocked to you. And it was simply probably to say something like, thank you, or I'm here with you, or I'm standing by you. In other words, people were drawn in, they weren't pushed away. And the big piece with this, and one of the biggest, and we haven't talked about many things that hold you back from being a great leader, but this is one of them. It's your ego. It's one of the biggest things that will hold you back from being a great leader. And the opposite of your ego is vulnerability. Because your ego says, my shit doesn't stink, or I don't smell, or I'm perfect. And vulnerability is the willingness to say, I don't have it all figured out. And the biggest problem with an ego is simply this, is that there's no improvements in ego. When you think you're perfect, why would you ever work to improve? And when you show vulnerability, it leads to authenticity. It leads to people giving you that feedback like you talked about. It leads to improvement.
And that leads to speed.
And
speed leads to production, which is what I think we're all kind of craving, right?
Exactly. The biggest fear for most people when it comes to my coaching clients is ego, of you thinking you have it all figured out. And the second you show vulnerability and that authenticity, that's when growth happens. Because growth doesn't happen when you're egocentric or you think you have it all figured out.
Mm-hmm. Great points. The title for this this webinar here is, and I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up, Grow Your Capacity, 5 Steps to Become a Better Leader. We've delivered 5. We're going to give you number 6 right now. And this number 6 is an important one. It's all about giving feedback. The world of giving feedback is really important. So the very first question I want to ask is, when somebody frustrates you in your world, when they get under your skin, when things don't go your way, does that person know that they're being destructive? And you'd be surprised at how many issues can stop right there when you realize that that person has no idea that they're being destructive. I listened to one of my coaching clients, who's also a good friend, explain to me how one of his people on his team was just making him nuts. Like, he was white-knuckled, angry, frustrated with this person. And I asked him the simple question. I said, does this person know that she's being destructive? And he stopped. And he's like, no, she doesn't. And so if you want to show up as a leader, you have to be willing to give feedback and have some great conversations. Now, there are 3 ways to confront people, or 3 steps you should take while confronting people. And this is going to be, I think, a huge golden nugget. So number 1, the first thing that you have to do is you have to assume positive intent. Conspiracy theories will often hijack your mind and your brain. If somebody shows up 5 minutes late to something, I automatically jump to conclusions that this person is insensitive, that I'm not important in their life, or that they died in a car accident. Or, I mean, like, we jump to worst case scenario things, right? Maybe they got held up by a client, or by traffic, or by construction, or whatever it may be. And if we don't assume positive intent, automatically we are not giving the person the benefit of the doubt. Robbie, you talk about this all the time. How has assuming positive intent changed your stars?
I think it's huge for a couple reasons. As I've studied and read a lot, because I read way too much sometimes, one of the biggest things I've learned is that if you don't assume positive intent, you're think negatively, your brain's self-fulfilling. That if I go into something with a negative mindset, and let's say somebody comes in with a scenario, I'm only going to hear the negative side of that scenario. The whole purpose behind assuming positive intent is a mindset where you start seeing things through, and maybe some people would argue, like rainbows and seeing, things like that. But the inverse is being negative. And when you think negatively, our brains are self-fulfilling. They have self-fulfilling prophecies. It's called anchoring. And if you think something negative, you are going to try and fulfill that negative vision in your mind. The reason we live by assuming positive intent is oftentimes we run into those conspiracy theories where we thought it was so much worse. If somebody answers my calls, they don't ever want to work with me. They don't like me. They don't love me. If they don't respond, it kind of reminds me of like a 12-year-old, right? Or 13-year-old when we were AIM back in the day, instant messenger. If somebody didn't, instant you back right away, I used to think like they hate me or they don't love me. When in reality, they're eating dinner, right? This is the point, is our brains will run and run and run with whatever we give it. And assuming positive intent allows us to avoid the anchoring on something negative because our brains work in self-fulfilling prophecies. So we got to assume positive intent. That way we give people a fair shake.
Yeah. Great points, Robbie. And what we find out with assuming positive intent is that most of the time they weren't manipulative and vindictive and evil and all those things, but it happens sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But think of it as, I mean, even our courts of law say you're innocent until proven guilty. And sometimes we need to allow that kind of grace to exist in our world. And by the way, I think that leadership and grace go hand in hand. That's not to say to abuse the standards that you have, but when you increase that social capital and you have a better relationship, quite often grace can show up as opposed to ruling with an iron fist. So when confronting somebody, number one, assume positive intent. And number two, I love this one, is come from curiosity. Ask questions before you make statements. It's the difference between dictating and listening. It's the difference between managing and leading, okay? The best leaders usually ask the best questions. And so if you're confronting somebody, let's go back to the situation of one of my coaching clients. Really frustrated with one of his team members. She didn't even know that she was being destructive. And so the first thing he has to do is he has to take it out of his mind that this person is manipulative and that she's trying to run the company down into the wrong direction. So number one, he assumes positive intent. And number two, he comes from curiosity. So let's say her name is Julie. He would say, Julie, what are you happy about with work? What frustrates you? What do you love to do? In this situation, how did you handle that? Were you happy with how you handled that? What would you have done differently? What is it that you felt when the other person responded in this way? And you just ask a whole lot of questions. Really, my coaching client could have gone in and said, Julie, yesterday you were a total jerk in the office and you didn't listen to anybody. And you just put your head down and you changed the temperature in the room, and I'm really tired of it, right? That's making statements. But when you come from curiosity, you ask all the aforementioned questions. And my guess is you can help lead that person to step number 3, and that is helping them self-discover. If you as a leader can bring it to somebody's attention of what they did wrong, and they are the ones to correct themselves, you don't have to manage. You understand that? Like we get so scared of having these conversations with people when it's confrontational and our anxiety builds up. But really, they're probably going to be a harder critic and harsher on themselves than you ever would be. Robbie, how have you experienced this?
I think the biggest example I can give is the contrast between going to somebody, and I think curiosity and self-discovery go hand in hand. And statements and accusations go hand in hand. When I came and I talked to you, Eric, I didn't just come in and directly say, Eric, you sucked. You just bombed it with all the agents. I started with, how do you think that came across to them? And if you were in their shoes, how would that have been heard? And then what happens is you start realizing, oh, snipes, that maybe didn't go as well as I thought because I didn't have permission there. Instead of me saying, Eric, you didn't have permission, you really bombed that. One is helping self-discover. One is lobbing an accusation through a statement. So it leads to more productive conversations, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. That final piece, step number 3 of helping somebody self-discover, man, that's important. I can't not emphasize that enough, is when you help somebody self-discover and they come to this conclusion on their own without you coming to the conclusion, that is leadership. Management is you telling them. Leadership is them discovering, okay? And so we covered a lot of ground today. We covered servant leadership. We covered mirroring and matching. We talked about creating leaders and not followers. We talked about the importance of having social capital. We talked about how to be vulnerable as a leader and how to give feedback. The final piece I want to talk about is this, is we have this major difference between leadership and management. And again, leadership is slow, management is fast. My coach said to me once, he said, if you hold somebody accountable to their goals, or to your goals, they'll thank you. But if you hold somebody accountable to their goals, here I'm getting this on myself. If you hold somebody accountable to your goals, they'll resent you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you hold somebody accountable to their goals, they'll thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And holding somebody accountable to what they want is leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Holding somebody accountable to what you want is management.
Mm-hmm.
Managers are quantitative. Leadership is quantitative. Leaders know intimately the people that they lead and how they best lead them.
Mm-hmm.
Managers have a one-size-fits-all mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you're wearing a new suit, and I love a new suit, right? If there's a one-size-fits-all, Robbie and I are going to look pretty different in that suit. But if it's a custom suit, understand that leadership is custom, and leadership is designed for each individual person. So there's a great fit, and so there's a great ability to get the best out of those people. Whatever your struggle may be, if it's in leadership or management, we want to be a resource for you. And I think that with Hatch Coaching, we actually have a great way to do so. September 14th to 16th, 2017 in Fargo, North Dakota. That's right, God's country itself. We are having a major event. It's our Hatch Coaching Summit, where we're going to dive super deep into all these issues we just talked about. On top of that, you're going to have the opportunity to mastermind and connect with some of the top business people in our entire country. And so at coachingwithhatch.com, you can find out more about this. We have limited seats, but we want this to be a time for you and for your team members who are essential leaders to come and to experience something great. It's all things culture, all things leadership, all things deeply impactful in your life, but we need you to sign up. So again, go to coachingwithhatch.com. Robbie, I'll give you a chance for final thoughts.
Yeah, the biggest thing is if you guys have any questions about any of this, you want some more examples, don't be afraid to reach out to me on Facebook, shoot me an email, text message, whatever you need to do. We're here to be resources for everybody. That's what we're passionate about, especially me. Is I'm a professor at heart, hence why I wear nerdy glasses, because I'm kind of a nerd, but I love helping people. So if you need anything, have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than willing to listen and see how we can help out.
With that, we're going to come to a wrap. We're going to continue to do these. Check out coachingwithhatch.com. We have all our past webinars up there. Some things real estate related, some things leadership related, but all things awesome. So go to coachingwithhatch.com. Sign up for our next coaching session, or excuse me, for our next summit, or to check out all our past videos. So on behalf of Robbie T and myself, Eric Hatch with Hatch Coaching, God bless you.
Thanks, y'all.